use, we're going to look at the various stages for undertaking a review and the type of approaches and issues that you should consider. First stage or phase is the design of the literature review. And so really what this means is trying to at least begin with the question of why are you undertaking this literature review? Seems like a fairly obvious question. You could say that you're given a question or given a topic, and so you have to explore a question, right? Or you have to examine that question, or you have to see what the latest development is in a technology for a particular topic, right? So be clear in your mind what it is that you're being asked to do and why you are undertaking the literature review. Remember, the literature review is a form of research. So another way of understanding this very first stage is, why are you doing this research? What's the purpose of it? Be clear in your mind about it. Once you've been given a research topic or research question, you need to think about how you're going to go about researching it, how you're going to go about it. Now, what people tend to do is use what's called ad hoc methods, if you can even have such a thing. Ad hoc means that you have no real plan. You literally just Google the question, and you look to see whatever you can find. Now, if someone said to you, okay, you Google the question, let's just say crudely put, or you Google the key words in the research topic, or you Google the whole research question, right? So you could do a number of different things. You could Google also the topic, pick out what you think the topic is. Now, you might think as a very first step in the process of undertaking research, that's a pretty loose and undisciplined or poorly disciplined approach. But actually what you really need to do is you need to make a start in it. It's a topic you may not necessarily know anything about. So this is not at all a bad idea. If you start by taking your research question and topic and simply Googling it, what you're aiming to do in this very first stage of phase one, the very first part, shall we say, of stage one, right? When you're trying to work out how this is going to, is you want to really get a flavor of what's out there. So your first stage is almost like a survey of what's out there. And in that survey, you're not going to be reading full articles, right? You might read the opening abstract for an article, and you think, oh, that sounds vaguely relevant to this topic. Let's put it to one side. So you gather, you survey, and you gather some initial sources. Okay, so that's really, really, really quite crucial. It's almost impossible to know, first of all, that what you've initially gathered and the initial sources will be the final sources you end up with. But your initial sources will help you, the idea of them is to guide you into the topic. Now, they can be, a very first step, pretty much anything that seems relevant. And so when people say never use Wikipedia, never use blogs, never use popular stuff, always go for the academic stuff, that's not strictly true. And to adhere to that too rigorously will actually make it very difficult for you to get on with it. The very first part is always to do this kind of broad keyword question topic survey. You can do it in Google, but you can also do it in Google Scholar. And you'll find Google Scholar will come back with much more specific academic heavy. That may be the second part. So the first part is you do this and you gather some initial sources. Then what you try to do is you try to look at these initial sources and get an idea of what the trends, what the major concepts are, what type of things people are saying and doing with this particular topic. Once you dig into your initial sources and you go through them in some way, you're then in a stronger position to have a better grasp of a direction to go. And that direction to go is you basically creating a plan which will have to do a number of different things. Okay, so remember the first phase is all about designing it, really. Um, it's not really about actually undertaking the full research. From the initial sources, what you're trying to say to yourself, is that, okay, I've spotted that these are the trends, these are the things, and you've surveyed a whole bunch. You may want to keep these articles because the articles that you find and the material and sources you find, you may think, oh, they're really good ones. At this stage, don't worry about that. You're simply trying to get an idea of the territory. And from that territory, you need to create a plan of how you're going to approach it. You need to help define which the relevant journal articles might be. So what are the proper academic sources that you may need to support what you're looking at, right? You may need to define a sharper version of what your approach is going to be. So let's kind of, explain what we mean. So you do your initial Google search, you find keywords, then something you're struck by when you gather together a whole bunch of sources, including blogs, magazine articles, maybe a few journal articles. Remember, at this stage, you are only getting a flavor. So you're reading abstracts and introductions to articles. You are not at this initial stage trying to read everything. Because if you do that, you are going to drown yourself in information and lose sight of the overall shape of what you're trying to do. You get an idea, and let's say that you spot a particular idea or a particular development that seems to be echoed across several pieces. Now that can become the basis of you then organizing a plan of how to pursue that particular gap or that particular concept that you've spotted. So for example, if your research question is about a technology, one thing you might want to do is when you just Google it, you notice that there's a real controversy around this technology and its application to a certain field. So you look at the initial way that you've been presented with your research topic and whether you can justify narrowing it down or focusing on this, right? So you may want feedback from your tutor to say, is it okay for me to focus on this controversy? Because in discussing that controversy, I will have to explain it and I'll discuss, I'll draw out all the trends and why we've led to this. So a good strategy of when you're trying to survey this stuff is you are trying to look at problems and issues, and that often helps you focus on something within that territory. If it's a simple technology and all your literature review is going to lead you to is just describing how it's used, that's a poor quality literature review. But if your literature review spots the controversies and issues around it, and you use that as the basis to pursue and plan your whole, check that you haven't over narrowed it with your tutor in a drop-in session, and then pursue it once you get the clarity from your tutor that that's the right way to go. So you identify a kind of problem. So then what you then have is you then have the basis of a plan. You have a basis of what are relevant sources, right? The issue of credibility is a general issue, and we'll discuss that in a second. So you've got an idea of what's relevant, credible, and what your aim is going to be. Give yourself an aim. Don't allow your research, once you've started to plan it, to just be, I'm just going to gather everything I can and I'm just going to describe it. Because that does not lead to, that's just very descriptive. And remember, description isn't the heart of this. Analysis is, synthesis is, critical reading is, right? Not simply description. So have an aim. So if you give yourself a particular aim, and if you're unsure about this, then make sure you go to the drop-in and you check with your tutor that is this aim acceptable. You then have got a plan. You'll then hopefully have developed a justification of what's a credible source. What's a credible source could simply be journal articles, but not any journal article. There are different types. You'll find that journals are ranked. part of your credibility may also relate to you reading a little bit about it and seeing that someone's just expressing an opinion. It's backed up with nothing. And so don't just look for academic journals to justify credibility. Look at the reasoning process and the evidence and the quality of the source when you are looking at this issue of credibility. It, for example, a really, really good source, a generally good source, is a magazine stroke public facing journal called The Conversation. It's written by academics on a topic for the mainstream audience. Going to The Conversation will in some cases allow you to find a handle on the topic that you need. So your first aim is to get a plan. To get a plan, you do some initial survey of what the territory looks like, and you organize your thoughts into what you're going to actually focus on. If it's a huge research topic, don't make your literature review huge, broad, and just bitty. You want it to hold together in some kind of coherent way, so you need to give it a focus. Often finding a problem or an issue or an application, development, or etc., and find a way of giving it focus. This will help you have some justification in your way you choose your articles, which ones are relevant, which ones are not. And you should have one, even if you don't write it. Credibility, as I said, is twofold. One is the kind of academic standing, and the other is the quality of the material inside it. If it is just someone expressing their opinion, and you can't spot that they've got these assumptions all over the place, and you're unsure whether you can trust it, well, read it, and if you're able to spot their assumptions, and you can spot whether it's strong or not, give yourself an aim, a sharper, focused aim to help organize your plan. Okay, so that's phase one or stage one, designing it. Let me just give you some last points. When you come to a real literature review, a substantial one for, say, a PhD or a final year project, you do need also a strategy for searching. And it's worth thinking about when you're planning this, that you give yourself a strategy, that you will only look at articles which deal with this aspect, or you will only look at articles published by the certain journals or a collection of journals and nothing else. But you need to justify the strategy that you have to yourself, because it massively impacts the credibility of what you write and the quality of what you'll produce. If you only focus on journal articles, you may find you miss an easy opportunity. If you find a more, as I said, The Conversation might provide you with some nice opening. People and academics and consultants write for the mainstream market, and it doesn't always lack credibility. It can be a very good way of grasping a topic and a way into a particular field. Okay, one of the biggest issues when you're thinking about planning, and we'll come to when we actually get going with it, is the number of articles, the amount of potential source material that you will encounter. And you need to give yourself some kind of standard, right? Ideally, you've got something clear in your head. It's related to the research topic. It's not arbitrary, right? It's reasoned out of what you will include and what you will exclude. Don't assume that this is all self-evident. The more you think in advance what makes sense, the better quality of what you will produce. Okay, so next up, we're going to look at actually the process of conducting the literature review. Then we'll look at the analysis phase, and then finally the writing.